The North African desert was a place where reality blurred with illusion. Waves of heat, shimmer rose from the sand in distorted lines. Horizons melted into the sky, and shadows stretched like ghosts across the dunes. It was a world both brutally unforgiving and strangely hypnotic. For soldiers and commanders alike, the desert was a battlefield not just of firepower, but of perception. Every ridge, every wadi, every shadow could conceal a man or a machine, and knowing where the enemy was, or thought he was, could determine life or death. For the German Afrika Korps, led by the brilliant and relentless Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, reconnaissance was everything. Daily aerial patrols, methodical photography, and experienced officers scanning the sands meant that almost nothing could move unnoticed. Yet in this harsh, open expanse, British forces were about to perform a feat that seemed impossible. They were going to make tanks disappear. The Sun Shield was a crude device by any technical standard. At its heart, it was simple: wooden frames, stretched canvas, and paint. But it was genius in its understanding of human perception. British engineers built frames around their 27-ton tanks, Crusaders, Grants, and Shermans, and then draped them with painted canvas, transforming massive armored beasts into what appeared, from the air, to be ordinary 3-ton supply lorries. The work was meticulous, yet unsophisticated, the kind of wartime improvisation that might have seemed laughable if it weren't so lethal. On paper, it shouldn't have worked. German reconnaissance pilots had optics far superior to anything on the British side, could photograph the desert methodically, and had officers trained to interpret the patterns of supply and armor in excruciating detail. Yet for nearly 2 years, from November 1941 through May 1943, Sun Shields repeatedly fooled the Afrika Korps. It was a deception that was as much about psychology as it was about mechanics. The Germans relied on pattern recognition. After months of observing supply convoys, armored formations, and logistical arrangements, their brains had built templates. A lorry looked like this, a tank like that. The Sun Shield exploited those mental shortcuts. It didn't need to fool a machine or a camera. It needed to fool the human mind. Through heat shimmer, from altitudes of 3,000 feet, across the distortion of the desert air, observers reported exactly what they expected to see: harmless trucks. Each frame, each painted shadow, each angled canvas panel was calibrated to match the observer's expectations perfectly. What the Germans saw was real to their perception. They weren't wrong. They were victims of their own cognitive strengths. The climax of the Sun Shield deception came during Operation Bertram in the weeks leading to the Second Battle of El Alamein in October 1942. British commanders faced a challenge. Rommel's forces were dug in, prepared to meet any frontal assault, and their panzers were positioned to counter the most obvious threats. The British had to hide the true location of their armored divisions and the timing of their attack. The solution was audacious. For 6 nights, British armor moved under the cover of darkness, shifting from the southern staging areas to the north, the very positions that German reconnaissance would photograph every day at predictable times. Each morning, the German aerial patrols flew their familiar routes, cameras whirring, eyes scanning. They saw the same scenes they expected: rows of lorries, tracks of supply vehicles. Nothing amiss. Meanwhile, the real British tanks lay hidden, ready to strike from the logistics areas, places that the Germans assumed contained only stores and trucks. When the attack came, the results were extraordinary. German commanders, relying on their carefully gathered intelligence, found themselves outmaneuvered. Panzers were positioned to meet threats that didn't exist. The British struck where they were least expected, the tanks emerging from areas the Germans had dismissed as innocuous. The shock of the deception was total. Operation Bertram demonstrated that intelligence gathering, for all its rigor, could be manipulated. By exploiting the predictable habits of reconnaissance flights, the British had effectively weaponized human perception itself. The sun shield was cheap, elegant, and devastatingly effective. Each unit cost only £12 to construct, a trivial sum for a weapon that could deliver tactical surprise equivalent to the deployment of entire divisions. Engineers and soldiers alike marveled at the simplicity. Wooden beams, canvas, and paint, materials that could be scavenged or improvised, had turned the desert itself into a stage for illusion. It was not theatrics for the sake of spectacle. It was systematic, calculated, and brutally practical. Every detail was designed to exploit the limitations of human perception, from the angles of canvas panels to the way shadows fell under the desert sun. It worked because it matched what observers expected to see. The mind, trained to recognize patterns, became the battlefield, and the sun shield was its weapon. German reconnaissance pilots were not incompetent. They weren't careless, lazy, or fooled by poor eyesight. They were skilled, methodical, and disciplined. They flew their aircraft with precision, captured hundreds of square miles of desert each day, and transmitted their observations up the chain of command. Yet in their strength, their reliance on pattern recognition, lay the vulnerability that the British exploited. Each pilot, seeing exactly what he expected to see, reported exactly what he saw. There were no mistakes, no misjudgments. And yet the deceptions succeeded repeatedly, a testament to the subtle interplay between human perception and tactical ingenuity. The desert itself contributed to the illusion. Heat shimmer distorted distances and shapes. Atmospheric conditions blurred outlines, sometimes turning vehicles into ghostly forms on the horizon. From 3,000 feet, an observer could see only the general shape and movement of objects. Detailed identification was impossible under these conditions. By leveraging these natural distortions, the British amplified the effectiveness of the sun shield. It was a clever marriage of engineering, psychology, and environmental awareness. In a sense, the desert itself became an accomplice in one of the most ingenious ruses of the war. Sun shield units were not merely static. British soldiers moved them, adjusted them, and maintained the illusion with a careful choreography. Teams worked tirelessly, ensuring that canvas flaps were taut, shadows fell in the right directions, and tracks in the sand suggested harmless logistical movement rather than armored deployment. Every lorry was positioned with intention. Every tank was disguised with purpose. The system was simple in concept, but complex in execution, demanding meticulous attention to detail under harsh, unforgiving conditions. The impact of Sun Shield went far beyond a single battle. Over nearly 2 years of desert operations, it consistently enabled the British to deceive the Afrika Korps, protect their armor, and control the timing and placement of attacks. The psychological effect on German commanders cannot be overstated. time and again, intelligence that seemed reliable, photographs, reports, and observations, was undermined not by a superior weapon, but by superior understanding of the human mind. Field Marshal Rommel, a master tactician, was caught off guard by what he assumed was an impossibility. Tanks in plain sight, yet invisible to his eyes. Ultimately, Sunshield was more than a military device. It was a lesson in perception, cognition, and the art of war. It demonstrated that in battle, the mind is as vulnerable as the body. It showed that human pattern recognition, one of the most powerful cognitive tools, can be exploited when assumptions are predictable. Each wooden frame and canvas flap was a challenge to conventional thinking, a reminder that ingenuity often lies in simplicity and subtlety rather than brute force. For the British forces in North Africa, it turned the desert into a theater of psychological mastery, where deception became as lethal as any shell or bullet. Sunshield also reminds us of the unexpected intersections of technology, environment, and human perception. The British did not need to outgun the Afrika Korps in every engagement. They needed only to manipulate what the Germans could reliably see. By understanding reconnaissance patterns, environmental distortions, and the cognitive biases of observers, they turned minimal resources into maximal strategic advantage. This was not luck, not whimsy, and not theater. It was war conducted at the intersection of psychology and engineering, a triumph of creativity over brute force, subtlety over sheer numbers. In the vast, shimmering emptiness of the North African desert, a simple wooden frame and a painted canvas could outwit the most formidable armored divisions of the war. A tank could disappear in plain sight, not because it was hidden, but because it exploited the very way the human brain interprets reality. Sunshield was cheap, crude, and brilliant. It reminds us that in war, the mind is the battlefield, and perception is often the deadliest weapon of all. The brilliance of the Sunshield lay not in sophisticated engineering or exotic materials, but in imagination applied with military precision. The idea of turning tanks into trucks was simple in concept, yet its execution demanded coordination, ingenuity, and a deep understanding of both human perception and desert warfare. In the barren expanses of North Africa, British engineers and soldiers set out to transform one of the war's most formidable machines, the 27-ton Crusader, Grant, and Sherman tanks, into seemingly harmless 3-ton supply lorries. The task was monumental, the environment unforgiving, and the margin for error razor-thin. It began with the engineers, a small group of men who were part technician, part artist, and part magician. They understood the way the eye interpreted shapes and shadows. Their mission was deceptively simple: disguise a massive angular tank so that from a distance and from the air it would resemble a common vehicle. They selected materials with care. Wood was cut into lightweight frames, easily transported across the desert, yet strong enough to hold the canvas taut against wind and occasional sandstorms. Canvas was stretched over the frames, painted in muted shades that mimicked the dust, sand, and camouflage of the desert supply routes. Details were added: crude wheel arches, simulated cargo beds, and painted wheels that suggested tires rather than tracks. Every feature was calibrated to fool pattern recognition, to fit the mental template of a lorry shaped by months of observation by German reconnaissance. The soldiers themselves became part of the illusion. Construction crews labored under the sun, assembling frames over tanks, stapling canvas, painting surfaces, and adjusting flaps to create the right shadows. Sweat poured down their faces. The desert heat was relentless, and sand infiltrated every seam, every tool, every uniform. Yet there was a quiet exhilaration in their work. They were not simply building disguises, they were constructing ghosts. Each completed sun shield was a triumph of psychology, a machine that would manipulate human perception on a battlefield where misjudgment could mean catastrophe. Rehearsals were meticulous. Before Operation Bertram, British units practiced night movements, tested how the sun shields appeared from various altitudes, and refined every aspect of positioning. Engineers would observe the sun at different times, adjusting canvas panels to cast the correct shadows. Tank commanders learned to move slowly to avoid revealing their true weight or suspension. Drivers practiced traversing the desert without leaving unnatural tracks. Even small details mattered. A shadow that fell slightly wrong, or a dust trail that suggested a heavier vehicle, could undo the entire ruse. Everything was choreographed. The desert became a theater, and the men of the British Army were actors in a performance designed to fool one of the world's most disciplined armies. The ingenuity of the sun shield extended to the strategic understanding of the enemy. British planners studied German reconnaissance with almost forensic detail. They knew the times, altitudes, and flight paths of daily aerial patrols. The Africa Corps pilots were methodical, photographing the same positions day after day. The British turned that predictability into an advantage. By moving their armor at night under cover of darkness and leaving only sun shield-covered tanks in observable positions, they fed the Germans exactly what they expected. Predictability, a hallmark of disciplined observation, became a weapon in the hands of the clever. It was not just about the equipment, it was also about deception in scale. Hundreds of sun shields were constructed, enough to cover the majority of the British armored presence at El Alamein. Logistic areas were transformed into illusions of bustling supply columns, while real tanks were concealed for the offensive. Soldiers were trained to move with precision, to avoid betraying their positions, and to maintain the illusion until the final moment. The combination of mechanical disguise, environmental awareness, and human coordination made Sunshield a revolutionary tool of warfare. There were challenges, of course. The desert environment was harsh and unforgiving. Sandstorms could rip canvases from frames. Heat could warp wood, and sudden rain, though rare, could soak painted surfaces, making them look unnatural. Engineers improvised continuously, reinforcing frames, adjusting paint tones, and training soldiers to respond quickly to any flaw in the illusion. Each setback was a test of creativity and discipline. The Sunshield was never static. It evolved constantly, adapting to both natural conditions and enemy reconnaissance habits. The men working on Sunshield were acutely aware of the stakes. Every canvas-covered tank was a potential decoy to save lives and enable strategic advantage. The operation required both courage and patience. Soldiers moved heavy equipment under the desert sun, knowing that a misplaced shadow could compromise an entire offensive. They were creating an army of ghosts, each one a calculated lie designed to mislead the most observant eyes in the world. The absurdity of making a 27-ton tank disappear did not escape them. There was humor in their work, nicknames for the awkward frames, jokes about hiding elephants under sheets, but it was a disciplined, serious humor, tempered by the understanding that the consequences of failure could be fatal. Sunshield's success relied on a deep understanding of cognitive science long before the term existed. Observers perceive what they expect. The human brain simplifies complex scenes into recognizable patterns, filtering information to save time and energy. By mimicking those patterns, Sunshield bypassed analytical thought entirely. German pilots were not fools. They were seeing exactly what they expected to see. The deception was perfect not because it created an illusion, but because it harmonized with reality as perceived by the enemy. Pattern recognition, humanity's greatest cognitive strength, became its greatest vulnerability. Operation Bertram, when it came, was a culmination of months of labor, imagination, and rehearsal. For 6 nights, British armor moved stealthily under cover of darkness from southern staging areas to northern positions. Each day, the Africa Corps conducted its reconnaissance flights, photographing the same coordinates, observing the same supposedly mundane supply columns. And every day, the Germans reported only what they expected: harmless trucks, logistical vehicles, nothing threatening. 300 tanks were masked in plain sight, waiting to strike at the precise moment. The strategic payoff was immense. When British forces launched their offensive at El Alamein, German commanders were caught off guard. Panzer divisions were arrayed against threats that did not exist, while real British armor emerged from logistics areas to execute a perfectly timed assault. The Sunshield did not merely hide tanks. It manipulated the timing, the positioning, and the mental state of the enemy. It was psychological warfare rendered in wood, canvas, and desert dust. By the time the smoke cleared, the Sunshield had demonstrated the extraordinary power of ingenuity combined with an understanding of human perception. It was cheap, effective, and brutally clever. Each unit cost only 12 pounds, yet it delivered tactical advantage equivalent to entire divisions of armor. The lesson was clear. War is not won solely by firepower or technology. It is also won by exploiting the ways people see, interpret, and assume. British ingenuity had created a weapon that operated in the mind rather than on the battlefield, and the results were spectacular. Sunshield remained a secret, known to few outside British command. Yet its impact echoed across campaigns in the desert. It inspired confidence, preserved lives, and showcased the extraordinary capacity for creative problem-solving under extreme pressure. The men who built it, from engineers to drivers to soldiers, became unsung heroes, masters of an art that was equal parts science and theater. Their work demonstrated that even in the harshest conditions, human ingenuity could bend reality, turning the desert itself into a stage for deception, strategy, and triumph. October 1942 brought tension to the sands of North Africa, unlike any before. Months of careful preparation, planning, and labor by British forces were about to be tested. The desert was still, the heat relentless, the wind lifting fine particles of sand into hazy veils that distorted distance and shadow. Rommel's Africa Corps had entrenched positions, panzers in defensive lines, and a network of observers relying on a predictable system of reconnaissance flights. For Field Marshal Montgomery and his commanders, the challenge was clear: deliver a decisive blow without giving the enemy any hint of the real disposition of British armor. The solution was Operation Bertram, the culmination of ingenuity, psychology, and logistics. Operation Bertram was a grand performance of wartime deception, where every tank, truck, and canvas frame was a carefully choreographed element. The sunshield units, previously tested in rehearsal, were deployed across the desert. From the air, nothing appeared unusual. Supply columns moved in predictable patterns. Mundane logistics operations filled the same coordinates the Germans had observed for months, and nothing suggested that British armor was positioned to strike in force. The Germans, meticulous and methodical, followed the script unwittingly. Daily reconnaissance flights captured photographic evidence of harmless lorries, and every report was faithfully transmitted up the chain of command. The deception relied on repetition. The Germans trusted what they saw because it aligned with months of prior observation. For 6 nights leading up to the offensive, British armor executed covert movements, repositioning from southern staging areas to northern attack positions. Engineers and soldiers worked under the cover of darkness, moving tanks carefully to avoid leaving telltale tracks, adjusting canvas to maintain illusions, and ensuring that every detail matched rehearsals. The desert was both ally and adversary. Its heat shimmer and distortion concealed subtle movements, but every misstep, a canvas flap loose, an irregular dust trail, could betray the deception. Soldiers knew the stakes. Success would deliver strategic surprise. Failure could mean catastrophic losses. On the German side, reconnaissance was relentless. Pilots followed strict flight paths, altitudes, and timetables, photographing the same sectors repeatedly. From 3,000 feet, the desert's distortion masked subtle inconsistencies. Shadows, distance, and atmospheric haze created a visual filter that the sunshield exploited perfectly. German observers were skilled and diligent, but their perceptual system relied on pattern recognition. Expectation guided interpretation, and the sunshield fed those expectations flawlessly. Each wooden frame, stretched canvas, and painted detail conformed to the mental template of a lorry, rendering the real tanks invisible to the enemy mind. The brilliance of Operation Bertram was not merely the camouflage of tanks, but the manipulation of German decision-making. By presenting harmless supply vehicles in observable positions, British commanders guided Rommel's assessment of the battlefield. Panzers were arrayed to counter threats that did not exist. German officers, confident in the reliability of their reconnaissance, misallocated forces, leaving sectors weakly defended where the real British armor lay in wait. The battlefield was being shaped in advance, not by artillery or airstrikes, but by a deep understanding of observation, expectation, and human cognition. When the attack finally commenced, the results were immediate and stunning. British tanks emerged from the logistics areas and struck where the Germans least expected. Panzers scrambled, defensive positions proved inadequate, and confusion rippled through Rommel's command. What the Germans had interpreted as harmless lorries were in fact the spearhead of a powerful offensive. Operation Bertram's success was the product of months of preparation, the ingenuity of Sunshield engineers, and the meticulous coordination of troops across the desert. It was a masterstroke, demonstrating that psychological manipulation could deliver as much tactical advantage as conventional firepower. The German commanders were astounded. Rommel himself was known for his strategic brilliance, yet even he had been deceived. Intelligence that had seemed infallible, photographs, reports, visual observations, was suddenly rendered unreliable. German pilots and officers were not incompetent. They were victims of the very system that had trained and conditioned them to see the world in predictable ways. Sunshield's genius lay in its subtlety. It required no extraordinary materials, no secret technology, only an understanding of human perception and the predictable behavior of observers. Operational details were exacting. Engineers ensured that canvas panels were angled to cast shadows consistent with the sun's movement. Dust trails were manipulated to suggest the passage of light vehicles. Every tank moved slowly to avoid revealing the suspension or weight of the real machine beneath the disguise. Units practiced tirelessly, refining movements, adjusting timing, and maintaining the illusion across an expanse of desert that stretched for miles. The coordination was staggering, but the discipline of the British forces, combined with ingenuity and rehearsal, ensured flawless execution. The psychological impact on German troops cannot be overstated.
Confidence in reconnaissance is fundamental to military decision-making. For months, the Africa Corps had relied on predictable aerial observations to position defenses and plan counterattacks. Operation Bertram subverted that confidence entirely. When British tanks struck unexpectedly, German officers realized that their most trusted intelligence had been manipulated. The shock extended beyond the battlefield. Commanders began to question the reliability of all reports. Morale was subtly shaken, and the British gained a significant strategic advantage that extended beyond immediate tactical gains. The cost of each sunshield was minimal. £12 per unit bought not just a camouflage frame, but the potential to redirect entire divisions, save lives, and achieve surprise on a scale that traditional military expenditure could not match. The operation illustrated a timeless principle. Ingenuity, combined with understanding of human perception, can outweigh numerical superiority. A simple wooden frame, stretched canvas, and paint had manipulated one of the most disciplined armies of the war, proving that tactical deception can be as lethal as tanks and artillery. As the battle unfolded, it became clear that Sunshield was more than a one-time trick. It was a paradigm for operational deception. The British forces had designed a weapon not from steel or firepower, but from insight. They understood their enemy's methods, anticipated their expectations, and constructed reality to manipulate judgment. The desert, harsh and unyielding, became a stage for intelligence and creativity, where the cognitive limitations of observation were weaponized to achieve strategic advantage. Operation Bertram's success was both immediate and lasting. It demonstrated the power of deception in modern warfare, influencing British planning in subsequent campaigns, and offering a lesson for generations of military strategists. The desert had been transformed into a theater of illusion, where tanks disappeared not through concealment, but through cognitive manipulation, and where human perception became the decisive battlefield. The Sunshield worked because it matched reality as the observer expected it to be. It did not invent invisibility. It exploited certainty, expectation, and pattern recognition, turning them into strategic instruments of war. By the end of the offensive, British forces had achieved not just a tactical victory, but a psychological one.
Rommel and his commanders were forced to confront the limitations of their own intelligence, the unreliability of observation under predictable conditions, and the profound effect that ingenuity could have on warfare. Sunshield had created an illusion so effective that for all intents and purposes, massive armored formations had vanished in plain sight, demonstrating that in war, the mind can be as important a battlefield as the ground itself. When the dust settled over El Alamein and the desert heat receded into the evening horizon, the magnitude of Operation Bertram became clear. British forces had not only delivered a decisive blow to the Africa Corps, but had demonstrated the extraordinary power of deception in warfare. The Sunshield, that unassuming wooden frame and canvas contraption, had achieved what conventional firepower could not. It had manipulated an enemy's perception, redirected armored divisions, and allowed strategic advantage to emerge not from the superiority of guns or tanks, but from ingenuity and understanding of human cognition. German commanders were stunned. Field reports flooded into Africa Corps headquarters, showing no indication of the massive armored formations that had emerged from the logistics areas. Panzer divisions had been positioned to counter phantom threats, while real British armor struck with devastating effectiveness.
For Rommel and his staff, it was a lesson in the limitations of intelligence gathering. Their reconnaissance had been flawless in execution, yet completely unreliable in outcome. The Sunshield had revealed a fundamental truth of warfare. The human brain, reliant on expectation and pattern recognition, could be deceived even under conditions of extreme scrutiny. The psychological impact on German officers and soldiers was profound. Confidence in daily aerial reconnaissance, a cornerstone of their desert strategy, was shaken. Pilots who had flown the same routes for months, capturing meticulous photographs and reporting their observations with precision, realized they had been systematically misled. Intelligence officers who had relied on visual data to allocate armored resources and plan defenses were forced to question the reliability of every report. Even the most disciplined and experienced troops were vulnerable to manipulation when their expectations were exploited. This was a victory of the mind over muscle, of subtlety over brute force. For British forces, the triumph went beyond battlefield success. Operation Bertram showcased the extraordinary potential of interdisciplinary thinking in warfare. Engineers, artists, logisticians, and soldiers collaborated to construct a deception that blended psychology, environmental science, and tactical insight. The Sunshield's success demonstrated that warfare was not merely a contest of firepower, but a complex interplay of perception, expectation, and creativity. Each 12-pound Sunshield became a force multiplier, transforming the battlefield into a controlled illusion where minimal resources delivered maximal strategic impact. The desert itself had played a crucial role. Heat shimmer, atmospheric distortion, and the vast expanse of sand amplified the illusion. But these environmental factors were not left to chance.
British planners had studied the desert's optical effects, understanding how light, shadow, and distance could be manipulated to their advantage. Shadows cast by canvas flaps, dust trails left by vehicles, and even the angle of the sun were all calculated to reinforce the deception. The environment became an accomplice, a partner in the orchestration of strategic misdirection,
and a reminder that warfare is as much about understanding terrain as it is about wielding weapons. The Sun Shield also highlighted the importance of predictability in intelligence collection. German reconnaissance relied on systematic patterns, daily flights at fixed altitudes, repeated photographic coverage of known coordinates, and consistent observation routines. The British exploited this predictability, moving their armor at night and leaving sun shield-covered decoys in observable positions during the day. By anticipating the enemy's methodology, they designed a system that fit perfectly within the intelligence-gathering habits of the opponent. What looked like a simple trick of camouflage was, in reality, a masterclass in operational psychology. Beyond the immediate battlefield effects, Operation Bertram had long-term consequences for military thinking. It inspired subsequent Allied operations, influencing how deception, camouflage, and intelligence manipulation were integrated into campaign planning. The principles behind Sun Shield, anticipating enemy expectations, exploiting predictable observation patterns, and using minimal resources for maximal effect, became enduring lessons for strategists in North Africa and beyond. The operation underscored that ingenuity and understanding of human perception could, in some cases, outweigh numerical or technological superiority. For the men who built and deployed the Sun Shield, the operation was both exhausting and exhilarating.
Engineers had labored under punishing desert conditions, assembling wooden frames, painting canvas, and adjusting every detail to perfection. Soldiers rehearsed movements, refined timing, and maintained the illusion under the most challenging conditions imaginable. Humor and camaraderie persisted amid the grueling work, a reminder that even in war, human creativity and morale are inseparable. Nicknames for the makeshift contraptions, jokes about hiding elephants under sheets, and shared pride in the illusion they had created kept spirits high, even as they manipulated one of the most disciplined armies of the war. The cost-effectiveness of Sun Shield was extraordinary. At just 12 pounds per unit, each Sun Shield delivered a tactical advantage equivalent to entire divisions of armor. The operation illustrated a principle that remains relevant in military strategy today. Intelligence is only as valuable as the perception it creates, and resources spent shaping that perception can yield returns far greater than expenditure on brute force alone. Sun Shield was not a gamble. It was a calculated exploitation of environmental, psychological, and logistical factors, executed with precision and discipline. Operation Bertram's legacy also lies in the subtle demonstration of the power of human cognition. German pilots and observers were highly skilled, yet their perception was shaped by expectation, experience, and cognitive shortcuts. The Sun Shield worked because it aligned perfectly with the mental template of a lorry. In exploiting the brain's reliance on pattern recognition, the British forces had weaponized the very mechanisms that humans use to make sense of the world. It was a reminder that in warfare, understanding the mind can be as decisive as understanding terrain or tactics. After El Alamein, the Sun Shield concept faded into relative obscurity, overshadowed by the scale and drama of armored and infantry advances. Yet its influence persisted in military doctrine and intelligence planning. Allied forces increasingly incorporated deception, camouflage, and the manipulation of enemy expectations into operations across Europe and the Pacific. Operation Bertram became a case study in the subtle art of psychological warfare, demonstrating that even the most formidable enemy could be manipulated with careful planning, disciplined execution, and an understanding of how humans perceive reality. The Sun Shield also stands as a testament to the ingenuity of ordinary soldiers and engineers working under extraordinary circumstances. What began as simple materials, wood, canvas, and paint, became a transformative tool of war. It was a triumph of human creativity, imagination, and practical problem-solving. The men who labored in the desert, often overlooked in conventional histories, shaped the course of battle and contributed to a deeper understanding of perception, deception, and strategic thinking. In the end, the story of Sun Shield is a lesson in humility and ingenuity. It reminds us that even the most predictable, disciplined enemy can be outsmarted, that perception can be manipulated, and that war is as much about understanding minds as it is about moving armies. The success of Operation Bertram illustrates that creativity, insight, and careful observation can transform the battlefield, turning ordinary materials into instruments of extraordinary impact. In the vast, shimmering desert, British ingenuity had made tanks vanish in plain sight, and in doing so, reshaped the understanding of intelligence, deception, and the human element in warfare. The desert of North Africa was more than a battlefield. It was a laboratory for human perception, a proving ground for ingenuity, and a crucible in which conventional ideas of warfare were challenged and transformed.
The success of the Sun Shield, that simple wooden frame and canvas contraption, was not only a triumph of tactical ingenuity, but a profound demonstration of how understanding the human mind can become as lethal as any weapon of steel or fire. In the weeks and months following Operation Bertram, British commanders, engineers, and soldiers reflected on what had been achieved, realizing that the implications of their deception extended far beyond a single offensive, or even the North African campaign. At the core of the Sun Shield's success was the exploitation of expectation. German reconnaissance pilots and officers relied on visual data interpreted through experience, training, and cognitive shortcuts honed over years of desert operations. They had built mental templates. Trucks looked a certain way, armored vehicles another. The British exploited these templates with precision, creating an illusion so complete that the enemy's perception became the battlefield itself. This was not mere trickery. It was a systematic, calculated manipulation of cognitive processes. The Sun Shield worked because it aligned perfectly with the patterns the Germans expected to see. The desert, with its heat shimmer, vast expanses, and optical distortions, amplified the effect, turning psychological insight into tactical advantage. The broader lessons of Sun Shield extend beyond the deserts of North Africa or even the context of World War II. They speak to the enduring principle that warfare is as much a contest of the mind as it is a contest of weapons and numbers. Modern military theory often emphasizes technological superiority, precision strikes, and advanced logistics. Yet Sun Shield reminds us that ingenuity, perception, and anticipation can outweigh superior firepower, even against a highly trained and technologically capable opponent.
In this sense, the Sun Shield prefigures many aspects of contemporary intelligence operations, cyber warfare, and psychological operations, where the manipulation of information and expectation can have decisive effects. In practical terms, the Sun Shield demonstrated the value of interdisciplinary collaboration in warfare.
Engineers, soldiers, artists, and logisticians worked together, blending technical skill with artistic insight, environmental awareness, and strategic planning. Each component, wooden frame, stretched canvas, painted details, coordinated movement, was essential. Yet the sum of these parts was far greater than any individual element. It was a demonstration that creativity in war is not merely an adjunct to firepower, but can be central to operational success. Military innovation, in this context, emerges not solely from new technology, but from the imaginative application of existing resources to exploit enemy expectations and cognitive patterns. The economic aspect of the Sun Shield also speaks volumes. Each unit cost a mere 12 pounds, yet the strategic value was immeasurable. Entire armored divisions were effectively hidden in plain sight, the enemy misled, and tactical surprise delivered with minimal expenditure. This cost-benefit ratio underscores a crucial principle. In warfare, leverage is often more decisive than expenditure. Minimal resources applied with insight, precision, and an understanding of human perception can achieve outcomes that far exceed their apparent value. The Sun Shield embodies this principle perfectly, providing a timeless lesson for military planners and strategists. Beyond economics and psychology, the Sun Shield operation illuminates the intersection of environment and ingenuity. The North African desert, hostile and unforgiving, provided both challenges and opportunities. Heat shimmer, dust, optical distortion, and the vast scale of the terrain all contributed to the success of the deception.
Yet, these environmental factors were not left to chance. British planners studied them, anticipating how shadows, light, and movement would be perceived from the air. By turning environmental limitations into assets, the Sun Shield exemplified the principle that terrain and perception are inseparable elements of military planning. Warfare is not conducted in a vacuum. It is conducted in a context shaped by climate, geography, and human cognition. And those who understand this triad can achieve extraordinary outcomes. The cognitive science behind Sun Shield deserves particular attention. Human perception relies heavily on pattern recognition. The brain simplifies complex scenes, filtering sensory input through expectations and prior knowledge. This cognitive shortcut is essential for survival, allowing humans to navigate complex environments efficiently. Yet in the context of warfare, it can be weaponized. The Germans saw exactly what they expected: lorries. They were not wrong. They were precisely correct in their perception. The illusion succeeded not because it falsified reality, but because it harmonized with the observer's mental model. In this sense, Sun Shield anticipated insights that modern cognitive psychology would formalize decades later. Human strengths, like pattern recognition, can also become exploitable vulnerabilities. Operation Bertram also provides a case study in leadership and execution under extreme conditions. British commanders coordinated a massive, intricate deception across hundreds of miles of desert, involving dozens of units and thousands of men. Engineers and soldiers worked under punishing heat, sandstorms, and logistical constraints. Every element had to align: positioning, timing, canvas tension, painting, and vehicle movement. Success required discipline, patience, and adaptability. The human element was as important as the material. Individual initiative, careful observation, and improvisation were vital. Sun Shield was a testament not only to ingenuity, but to the capacity for coordinated human effort in pursuit of a complex, strategic goal. The psychological dimension extended to the enemy. German forces, relying on repeated observation and seemingly reliable intelligence, were manipulated into allocating forces incorrectly, misjudging the battlefield, and ultimately suffering defeat in ways they could neither anticipate nor easily correct. Their own training, experience, and cognitive discipline became vulnerabilities when exploited by a well-designed deception. In this way, Sunshield transformed human cognition from an asset into a battlefield liability. It demonstrates that in warfare, the mind can be as decisive as the most powerful weapon. In a broader historical context, the Sunshield exemplifies the ingenuity that characterized the Allied approach in the North African campaign. Lacking the numerical superiority of the Germans, British forces relied on creativity, intelligence, and deception to gain strategic advantage. The operation illustrates how resource constraints can stimulate innovation, prompting solutions that are elegant, effective, and psychologically sophisticated. Sunshield is not simply a wartime anecdote. It is a model for thinking creatively under pressure, leveraging limited resources, and understanding both the environment and the opponent. Sunshield also offers enduring lessons for modern military education. It emphasizes the importance of anticipating enemy expectations, exploiting predictable observation patterns, and integrating technology, environment, and human psychology into planning. Military academies and intelligence schools continue to study similar operations, examining how deception can amplify force effectiveness, manipulate decision-making, and create opportunities for strategic surprise. The operation remains a benchmark in the study of camouflage, misdirection, and the human factors of combat.
The ethical dimension is subtle but significant. Sunshield achieved its goals without direct loss of life through the deception itself. It allowed forces to preserve armored units, protect soldiers, and achieve surprise in a way that minimized unnecessary casualties. This highlights a dimension of military strategy often overlooked. The clever use of intelligence and perception can achieve decisive outcomes without reliance on brute force, excessive attrition, or catastrophic engagement. Creativity, psychology, and foresight become tools for both effectiveness and efficiency in warfare. The human stories behind Sunshield remain compelling. The engineers who sketched frames, stretched canvas, and painted illusions did so under conditions of intense pressure. Soldiers executed rehearsals in punishing heat, coordinating movements with precision, often laughing at the absurdity of disguising tanks as trucks, while knowing that the stakes were life and death. Humor, pride, and ingenuity combined to sustain morale, foster collaboration, and ensure flawless execution. The operation demonstrates that human creativity and resilience can shape outcomes as decisively as any weapon or strategy. Even decades later, the Sunshield operation continues to resonate as a study in deception, psychology, and strategy. It offers insights not only into military history, but into human cognition itself, the ways in which expectation shapes perception, how predictability can be weaponized, and how creativity applied under constraints can achieve extraordinary results. The North African desert, harsh and unforgiving, became a classroom for strategic insight, demonstrating that victory is not determined solely by strength or technology, but by the imagination and foresight
of those who understand the mind of the enemy. In reflecting on Sunshield, it is clear that the operation was a triumph of intellect and insight. It transformed the battlefield into a stage where human perception could be guided, manipulated, and exploited to achieve strategic advantage. The desert sands may have shifted over decades, and tanks and lorries have long since vanished. But the lessons endure. Ingenuity and psychological understanding can rival any arsenal. Minimal resources, applied with insight, can yield consequences far beyond their apparent value. And the human mind, for all its sophistication, is as vulnerable to manipulation as it is capable of extraordinary perception. Ultimately, Sunshield reminds us that warfare is an interplay between reality and perception, between material power and cognitive insight. It shows that creativity, discipline, and psychological sophistication can create strategic outcomes that brute force alone cannot achieve. From a wooden frame and a piece of canvas, British forces reshaped a battlefield, outwitted one of the most disciplined armies in history, and demonstrated that understanding the human mind can be as powerful as understanding artillery, armor, or logistics. The story of Sunshield is a story of imagination, intelligence, and subtlety, triumphing over expectation and experience. It is a testament to the power of careful observation, meticulous planning, and creative problem-solving under extreme pressure. It underscores that in warfare, perception can be the ultimate weapon, and the mind can be the most decisive battlefield of all. Even today, Sunshield serves as a vivid reminder that history is full of instances where ordinary materials, ordinary men, and extraordinary ideas can reshape the course of events. It teaches lessons in psychology, strategy, and human cognition that transcend the desert sands of North Africa and continue to resonate wherever insight, ingenuity, and anticipation meet the unpredictable realities of conflict.